What kind of son smiles while his wife pushes his father in front of everyone? How does a quiet ecologist, dismissed as weak, irrelevant, and smelling worse than smoke, erase an entire life of arrogance in a single night? People later asked how I destroyed her world before sunrise. The answer is simple. I stopped asking for respect and let the truth do the work. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. The evening air tasted like charcoal and summer heat. I stood at the edge of Aaron's backyard patio, watching smoke curl upward from the cigarette dangling between his fingers. My chest tightened the way it always did when I breathed too deeply around burning tobacco. Decades in the field, wetlands, forests, places where air quality mattered more than people realized, had left my lungs sensitive. Not damaged exactly, just aware. "Dad, you made it," Aaron said, glancing up from his phone. His tone was flat, the kind of greeting you'd give a delivery driver. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, keeping my voice steady. These small gatherings were the only threads left between us. Liana appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of drinks. She wore a white blouse that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget and had her hair pulled back in a way that made her look sharper than she already was. She set the tray down hard enough that ice rattled in the glasses. "Nathaniel," she said, not looking at me. "Surprised you showed up on time for once." I didn't respond. There was no point. Liana had decided who I was years ago, and nothing I said would change that. Aaron took another drag from his cigarette, exhaling a thick plume directly into the space between us. I stepped back instinctively, coughing once into my fist. "Aaron," I said quietly, would you mind not smoking right here? You know it bothers my breathing." He blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. "What?" "The smoke," I said, gesturing vaguely. "It's just my lungs, from all the field work. I've mentioned it before." Liana turned then, her expression shifting from indifference to something colder. "Oh, for crying out loud," she said, loud enough that the neighbors 2 yards over could hear. "You smell worse than the smoke, Nathaniel. All that time rolling around in mud and swamps. Maybe if you spent less time with frogs and more time acting like a normal person, Aaron wouldn't have to walk on eggshells around you." The words landed like stones. I felt my face flush, not from anger, but from the suddenness of it. The neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, had stopped their conversation. They were looking now. I tried to step back further, to give myself space, to breathe. But Liana moved forward instead, closing the distance. "Excuse me," I said. She pushed me. Not harshly, not through force, but deliberately. Her palm flat against my shoulder, shoving me aside like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. I stumbled, caught myself against the patio railing, and looked up at Aaron. He was smiling. Not a big smile, just a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth, the kind of expression someone makes when they're uncomfortable but too cowardly to intervene. He looked at Liana, then back at me, and said nothing. I steadied myself, gripping the railing until my knuckles went white. My chest felt tight again, but not from the smoke this time. "I should go," I said. No one stopped me. I walked down the driveway, past the Callahans, who quickly looked away, past the mailbox with Aaron's name on it, no mention of mine, though I'd helped him buy the house, past the street corner where I used to walk him to the bus stop when he was 6 years old. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached my truck. I pulled it out, stared at the screen for a long moment, then made a call that changed everything. "Marin," I said when she picked up. "It's Nate Rowan. I need to talk about those old conservation easements." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Liana's hand touched my shoulder, the way Aaron's smile flickered like a light bulb about to go out, the silence that followed me down the driveway. 52 years old, and I'd been pushed aside like garbage. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the realization that this had been building for years, and I'd convinced myself it was normal. That I was overreacting. That if I just stayed quiet and gave them space, things would improve. I got up at 5, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. The house was too quiet. It had been quiet since the divorce 18 years ago, but I'd gotten used to it. Raised Aaron alone, worked my way through environmental surveys and conservation projects, kept my head down, and did what needed to be done. Aaron had been a good kid once. Curious. Asked questions about the wetlands I studied, about the birds I tracked, about why some trees grew crooked and others stood straight. But somewhere around 15, he started pulling away. And when he met Liana 3 years ago, the distance became a canyon. She'd made it clear from the beginning that I was an embarrassment. Too old-fashioned. Too focused on work that didn't make real money. too comfortable in boots and field jackets instead of business casual. She joked about it at first, light teasing that Aaron laughed along with. But the jokes got sharper, meaner, and Aaron stopped defending me. Holidays became optional, phone calls became texts, texts became silence. Last Christmas, they'd invited me for dinner. I brought a bottle of wine and a dessert I'd picked up from the bakery Liana liked. She'd glanced at it, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Store-bought? Really, Nathaniel?" Aaron had changed the subject quickly, but the damage was done. I ate quietly, left early, and spent the rest of the evening in my garage workshop, organizing old field reports. I finished my coffee and got dressed. The bruise on my shoulder was faint but visible when I lifted my arm. I pulled on a long-sleeved shirt and drove to the Regional Environmental Survey office. Work was different. At work, people listened when I spoke. They respected my experience, my eye for detail, my ability to spot environmental violations before they became disasters. I was good at what I did. I'd spent 30 years earning that competence. Jonah was already at his desk when I arrived, sorting through yesterday's field data. He looked up, grinned, and said, "Morning, Nate. You look like you didn't sleep." "Didn't," I admitted. He frowned, then noticed the way I was holding my shoulder. "You okay?" "Fine." "Nate, I'm fine, Jonah." He didn't push, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Jonah was 32, sharp, loyal, and one of the few people who genuinely cared. I settled into my desk and opened my email. Halfway down the list was a message from a neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, from 2 doors down from Aaron's place. "Mr. Rowan, I'm not sure how to say this, but I thought you should know. After you left last night, Liana was laughing. She said something about how you'd finally learned your place." "I'm sorry. I thought you deserved to know." I read it twice, then closed the email. My phone buzzed. A text from Aaron. "Dad, maybe it's best if you give us some space for a while. Things are complicated right now." I set the phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall. Jonah walked past, paused, then leaned against the edge of my desk. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking." He nodded slowly. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." I worked through the morning, reviewing survey maps and compliance reports, but my mind kept drifting. By noon, I couldn't sit still anymore. I told Jonah I was heading out to the field site and drove to the wetland observation deck on the east side of town. The air was cooler there, cleaner. I stood on the wooden platform overlooking the marsh, watching herons move through the shallow water with the kind of patience most people had forgotten how to practice. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from someone I didn't recognize. "Heard what happened at Aaron's place. Everybody's talking. You gonna let her do that to you?" I turned the phone off and closed my eyes. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a plan was forming. Not revenge, exactly. Just clarity. A recognition that I'd spent years being underestimated, dismissed, and ignored, and that maybe, just maybe, I had more leverage than anyone realized. I stayed at the wetlands until the sun dropped low, then drove back to the office. Jonah was still there, locking up. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I need a favor." He raised an eyebrow. "Shoot." "Pull the observational notes from the Riverbend site. Everything from the last 6 months. I want dates, timestamps, and any photos we took of boundary violations." Jonah's expression shifted. "You working on something?" "Maybe." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll have it ready by tomorrow." I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat in the truck for a long time. My phone was still off. The house was dark, and for the first time in years, I felt something sharp and clear settling into place. Not anger, purpose. The wetlands had always been my refuge, long before Aaron was born, before the marriage unraveled, before people decided I was someone who didn't mind being overlooked. Out here, the world made sense. Plants rooted where conditions allowed, animals adapted, water followed gravity. Nature didn't pretend, people did. People lied and smiled while doing it. The next morning I stood on the observation deck, coffee warming my hands, watching fog rise from the marsh like breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Since turning it back on, I already had 6 missed calls from Aaron and 3 texts from Liana. First gentle, then irritated, then aggressive. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. The progression was familiar. Instead, I focused on the marsh. The heron I'd tracked for 2 seasons, still as a statue in the shallows. Young willows forcing their roots through impossible mud, and then something wrong, discolored water creeping along the southern boundary. A murky brown tint that didn't belong here. I pulled out my field notebook. That boundary ran beside a property recently bought by developer Holt Avery, a man who wore tailored suits to community meetings and spoke with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. He'd tried to push through a rezoning 3 years earlier that would have gutted half this wetland. I'd barely stopped him, scraping together enough support to block the vote. He'd shaken my hand afterward and said, "Well played, Rowan." But his eyes told another story. He wasn't done. I took photos of the runoff, noting the sharp line where clean water turned muddy. I'd have Jonah test it later, though I already suspected what we'd find. I drove into town and stopped at the cafe. The place was mostly empty, just early risers and quiet conversation. I sat by the window, trying to understand why this stirred something in me. Yes, Aaron and Liana had pushed me aside, but the deeper truth was harder to ignore. Being patient and agreeable hadn't earned respect. It had only made it easier for people to treat me as optional. That evening, the Environmental Board was meeting. I hadn't planned to attend, but instinct, honed from decades of fieldwork, told me I needed to be there. I arrived 10 minutes early. The room was half full with familiar faces. Activists, property owners, city employees, and then I saw them, Aaron and Liana, sitting 2 rows behind Holt. Aaron's face drained of color when he spotted me. He leaned toward Liana, whispering urgently. She turned, met my eyes, and smirked. A calculated expression. She knew something, or thought she did. I forced myself to look at the agenda. Item 3, Riverbend Access Agreement, Preliminary Discussion. My chest tightened. After the first 2 tedious items, Holt stood. He moved confidently, smoothing his tie, his slides already glowing on the screen. His presentation was polished. Talk of community access, economic benefit, environmental sensitivity. He referenced an access agreement signed by local stakeholders that would allow controlled construction near the boundary. He didn't name names, but when his hand swept vaguely toward the back of the room, Aaron shifted in his seat. When questions opened, I raised my hand. "You mentioned an access agreement," I said. "Who signed it?" Holt's smile held. "Private parties, Nathaniel. The filing includes the details." "I'd like to see the filing. I hold conservation easements on the adjacent parcels." A ripple went through the room. Holt's expression flickered, just for a second. "I'm sure this is a minor oversight," he said. "We can discuss it outside the meeting." "I'd prefer to address it here," I replied. Patricia, the chair, stepped in. "Mr. Rowan, you may submit concerns in writing." "I will," I said. Liana shot me a look sharp enough to cut. Aaron stared straight ahead, rigid. The meeting stumbled forward, but the momentum was gone. What had been a smooth path to approval now had a fault line running through it. I slipped out before anyone could approach me and sat in my truck, watching people file out. Aaron and Liana hurried to their car, arguing. Holt lingered, speaking with board members, his confidence diminished. I pulled out my phone and called Maren Kessler. She answered immediately. "Nate, I wondered when you'd reach out." "I need to see you, tomorrow morning." "I'll clear my schedule," she said. Then, after a pause, "But whatever you're about to start, understand that once this thread is pulled, everything connected to it will unravel." "I'm ready," I said. I didn't know if it was true, but it needed to be. Maren Kessler's office smelled like old paper and strong coffee, the kind of smell that clings to places where important work happens. She was a sharp woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and a reputation for being relentless when it came to property rights and environmental law. We'd worked together on several conservation easement cases over the years, and I trusted her more than most people. She didn't waste time on pleasantries when I arrived at 7 the next morning. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her office was organized chaos. Files stacked precisely, maps tacked to every wall, legal books with colored tabs marking important sections. "Tell me exactly what you know." I explained the meeting, the access agreement, the fact that Aaron and Liana had been sitting there while Holt made his pitch like they were part of his team. I explained the smirk on Liana's face, Aaron's silence, Holt's carefully worded evasions. Maren leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin. "And you think they signed something without telling you?" "I know they did," I said. She opened a file on her desk, a thick one, and slid a document across to me. "I pulled this yesterday after you called. It's the preliminary filing Holt submitted to the board. Take a look at page 4. I flipped to the page. There, in neat black print, were 2 signatures, Aaron Rowan and Liana Rowan. Dated 3 weeks ago. My hands tightened on the paper. "They authorized access to a parcel that borders the wetland conservation zone," Maren said. "The problem is, they don't actually have the authority to do that." I looked up. "What do you mean?" She pulled out another document, older, yellowed at the edges. You filed a conservation easement 12 years ago covering several adjacent parcels, including the one your son currently lives on. That easement gives you environmental oversight, not them. Any agreement affecting wetland boundaries needs your approval. I stared at her. Are you saying the access agreement is invalid? I'm saying it's complicated, she said. But yes, if Holt moves forward without addressing the easement, he's in violation, and so is anyone who signed off on it. I felt something cold and sharp settle into my chest. Not satisfaction, just recognition. There's more, Marin said, sliding another file across the desk. I did some digging into Holt's previous projects. He has a pattern of skirting compliance, especially when it comes to wetland protections. I flipped through the file. Project after project, each one leaving a trail of environmental damage and minimal penalties. If I were you, Marin said, I'd start documenting everything. Every violation, every discrepancy, every detail that doesn't add up. Because if you're going to challenge this, you need to be bulletproof. I already am, I said quietly. She smiled faintly. I thought you might be. I left her office with a folder full of documents and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The pieces were there. I just needed to organize them. Back home, I cleared off the workbench in my garage and laid everything out. Maps showing the wetland boundaries, copies of the conservation easements, photos from the wetland site, Jonah's observational notes, and copies of the access agreement Aaron and Liana had signed. I worked through the afternoon, cross-referencing dates and locations, marking discrepancies, building a timeline. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Holt's project wasn't just skirting compliance. It was obliterating it. The access route would cut directly through a protected buffer zone. The construction timeline overlapped with nesting season for 3 species of migratory birds. And the water discoloration, likely runoff from preliminary clearing work that hadn't been authorized. My phone buzzed, a text from Jonah. Got those notes you asked for. Want me to bring them by? Tomorrow is fine. Another text, this time from Aaron. Dad, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down without responding. The next morning, I drove to the city records office and requested copies of every filing related to the Riverbend site. The clerk gave me a sympathetic look when I explained what I needed. This is going to take a while, she said. I've got time, I said. 2 hours later, I walked out with a stack of documents that confirmed what I already suspected. Holt had been laying groundwork for months, quietly filing permits while keeping the environmental review process vague. That evening, I sat in my garage workshop, organizing everything into a single binder. Maps, photos, field reports, signatures, dates. A clear, undeniable record. I heard a car pull into the driveway. Aaron. He knocked on the garage door. Dad, you in there? I opened the door halfway. Yeah. He looked tired, worried. Can we talk? About what? About whatever you're doing, he said. Liana's freaking out. She says you're trying to sabotage us. I'm not sabotaging anyone, I said. I'm just making sure things are done correctly. Dad, please. His voice cracked. Just let it go. It's not a big deal. I looked at him for a long moment. You pushed me, Aaron. He blinked. What? At the patio. Liana pushed me and you smiled. His face went red. That's not... I didn't... Yeah, I said quietly. You did. I closed the door. The next day, I received a notice in the mail. Mandatory Environmental Compliance Hearing. Riverbend Development Proposal. Aaron and Liana were listed as parties of interest. I set the notice on my workbench and allowed myself a thin smile. Everything was falling into place. The cafe near the river was nearly empty when I walked in 2 days later. Jonah was already there, sitting by the window with 2 cups of coffee waiting. He'd texted me earlier asking if we could meet before work, his message carrying an urgency that was unusual for him. You look better, he said as I sat down. Do I? Less like you're about to snap, more like you've made up your mind about something. He slid one of the coffee cups toward me. That's either really good or really bad. I took a sip. The coffee was good, strong and hot. Thanks for meeting me. No problem. He leaned back, studying me. So what's going on? Because I've been watching you for the past week, and you're definitely working on something. I considered how much to tell him. Jonah was loyal, but he was also young enough to think that family problems should be solved with conversation and compromise. I need those observational notes, I said. The ones from Riverbend. And I need you to testify at the compliance hearing if it comes to that." His eyebrows went up. "Testify? About what?" "About what we've observed over the past 6 months. The unauthorized vehicle access, the vegetation clearing that wasn't permitted, the water quality changes, just the facts." He was quiet for a moment. "This is about your son, isn't it?" "It's about following regulations," I said. "About making sure people don't destroy protected habitat because they couldn't be bothered to do things correctly." "But your son signed off on it." "My son made a mistake," I said flatly, "and now he gets to learn from it." Jonah nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it. But Nate, are you sure about this? Because once you put family in that position, it's hard to walk it back." "I'm sure," I said. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, watching joggers pass by the window. Some things couldn't be stopped once they were set in motion. After Jonah left, I sat alone for a while longer. The hearing was less than 2 weeks away. I had the documentation, I had the legal standing, I had witnesses. What I didn't have was any desire to back down. My phone buzzed, another text from Liana. "You're making a huge mistake. Aaron is devastated. You're tearing this family apart over nothing." I deleted it without responding. The hardware store was quiet when I stopped in that afternoon. I needed basic supplies, folders, binders, labels, markers. Nothing dramatic, just the tools necessary to do the job right. The clerk rang me up without comment. As I was leaving, I passed Holt coming in. He saw me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice friendly in that false way. "Been meaning to call you, clear up any confusion about the Riverbend project." "No confusion," I said. "Everything's very clear." "Good." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, I respect what you do. Environmental work is important, but sometimes we have to balance protection with progress." "Progress that destroys what we're supposed to be protecting isn't progress," I said. "It's just destruction with better marketing." His smile tightened. "I suppose we'll have our chance to discuss perspectives at the hearing." "I'm sure you are," I said, and walked out. That evening, Jonah brought the observational notes to my garage as promised. The file was thick, organized chronologically, each entry documented with photos and precise timestamps. We spent an hour going through it together, confirming dates and details, making sure everything was accurate and defensible. "This is solid work," I said. "Just doing my job," Jonah said. Then, more quietly, "You really think this is going to work?" "If the law means anything, yes." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He was young enough to still believe that things worked the way they were supposed to. After Jonah left, I organized the observational notes into my binder, adding them to the growing evidence. Maps showing exactly where violations had occurred, photos documenting each one, dates proving when things had happened. I worked late into the night, checking and rechecking everything, looking for weaknesses, gaps, details I might have missed. But the more I reviewed it, the stronger it became. Around midnight, my phone rang. "Aaron." I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text. "Dad, please. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I turned off the phone and went back to work. The binder was nearly complete now. Section 1. Conservation easement documentation. Section 2. Maps and boundary surveys. Section 3. Photographic evidence of violations. Section 4. Field observations and water quality reports. Section 5. Timeline of unauthorized activities. Section 6. Legal precedents and regulatory codes. Everything cross-referenced, everything dated, everything verified. I closed the binder and set it on the workbench, perfectly aligned with the edge. 10 days until the hearing. The days before the hearing moved with the strange quality of time that feels both too fast and too slow. I went to work, completed my surveys, filed my reports, and spoke to colleagues with the same professional courtesy I always had. But underneath everything, I could feel the weight of what was coming. Jonah kept glancing at me from across the office, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. He didn't ask questions, but I could tell he wanted to. The observational notes sat in my truck, locked in a secure case, waiting for their moment. On the 5th day before the hearing, I drove out to the wetland observation deck again. The water had changed since my last visit, clearer in some places, murkier in others. The discoloration near the southern boundary had spread slightly, a brown stain creeping further into the protected zone. I took more photos, documenting the change with date stamps and GPS coordinates. Then I walked the perimeter trail, looking for signs of recent activity, tire tracks that shouldn't be there, broken vegetation, disturbed soil. I found all 3. Someone had been accessing the site from the south, cutting through the buffer zone with vehicles heavy enough to leave deep ruts in the soft ground. The tracks were recent, probably within the past week, fresh enough that the edges hadn't eroded yet. I photographed everything, making sure to capture the context. The protected boundary markers, the no vehicles signs that had been ignored, the damage to native vegetation that would take years to recover. This wasn't preliminary surveying. This was active preparation for construction that hadn't been approved yet. I called Marin from the observation deck. "They're already moving equipment," I said when she answered. "Before the hearing, before approval." She was quiet for a moment. "That's either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid." "Or both," I said. "Document everything," she said. "This could actually work in our favor. If they're jumping the gun on approvals, that's grounds for immediate suspension regardless of anything else." "Already on it," I said. I spent another hour at the site, making sure I had every angle covered. Then I drove back to town and stopped at a print shop. I had the new photos printed in high resolution, large enough that details would be visible from across a hearing room. The clerk who handled my order gave me a curious look but didn't ask questions. Small towns were like that. Everyone knew something was happening, but they waited to see how it played out before choosing sides. That evening, I updated my binder with the new evidence. The timeline was damning now. Unauthorized access before permits, construction preparation before approvals, a pattern of behavior that showed complete disregard for process. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Heard you're making trouble at the hearing. Some advice, don't. Holt has lawyers. You have paperwork. Think about who wins that fight." I read it twice, then deleted it. The next morning at work, I found a note on my desk. Handwritten, no signature. "People are talking. They say you're going after your own son. That's cold, even for you." I crumpled it and threw it away. Jonah saw the gesture and walked over. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Nate," I said I'm fine. He held up his hands. "Okay, just checking. You seem tense." "Big hearing coming up," I said. "Just focused." He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't quite believe me. "Well, I've got your back. Whatever you need." "I know," I said. "Thanks." The weekend before the hearing, I drove out to the wetlands one more time. Not to document anything, just to remember why this mattered. I stood on the observation deck and watched the sun set over the marsh. The herons were coming back to roost, their silhouettes dark against the orange sky. The air smelled like water and growing things, clean and alive. This place had been here long before Holt decided it was in his way. Long before Aaron bought a house on its border. Long before any of us. And if I did my job right, it would be here long after. My phone rang, Aaron again. This time, I answered. "Dad?" His voice was strained. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been busy," I said. "We need to talk. Before the hearing. Please, just give me 30 minutes." I looked out over the marsh, watching the light fade. "Talk about what?" "About all of this. About what you're doing. About," he paused, "about what happened at the house. About Liana. About everything." "What about it?" "I know you're upset. I know we should have handled things differently. But Dad, this hearing, it's going to ruin us. Holt says if the project gets blocked, he'll sue us for breach of contract. We could lose the house. Everything." "You signed an agreement you didn't have authority to sign," I said. "That's not on me." "We didn't know." His voice rose. "Holt told us it was fine. He said he'd checked everything. How were we supposed to know about some easement you filed a decade ago?" "You could have asked me," I said quietly. "You could have included me in the conversation. You could have treated me like I mattered." Silence on the other end of the line. "This isn't just about the easement, is it?" Aaron said finally. "No," I said. "It's not." More silence. "Dad, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can work something out with Holt, maybe restructure the agreement. Get your approval added retroactively. There has to be a way." "There is a way," I said. "Stop the project. Restore the damage that's already been done. Follow the actual regulations." "That's not realistic? Then I guess we don't have anything else to talk about," I said. "Dad," I ended the call. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of orange on the horizon. The herons had settled in for the night. The marsh was quiet except for the gentle sound of water moving through the reeds. I stood there until full dark, then drove home. 3 days until the hearing. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. I woke at 5, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table going through the binder one final time. Everything was in order, every document cross-referenced, every photo labeled, every timeline verified. I'd gone through this binder so many times I could recite sections from memory, but I checked anyway, because this wasn't the kind of thing you left to chance. At 6:30, Jonah called. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready as I'll ever be." "I'll meet you there." Got my notes organized, photos printed. "It's all solid, Nate." "I know," I said. "Thanks for doing this." "Hey," he said. "It's the right thing." Sometimes that's all that matters. After we hung up, I showered, dressed in the one suit I owned. Dark gray, professional, the kind of thing I wore to grant presentations and budget meetings. I wanted to look like someone who should be taken seriously, someone who knew what they were talking about, not the old man who smelled like swamps. I loaded the binder and supporting materials into my truck and drove to the municipal building. The hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the main conference room. I arrived at 8:15. The parking lot was already half full. I recognized several cars: Holt's expensive sedan, Aaron's newer model SUV, Marin's practical hybrid, a few vehicles I didn't recognize, probably belonging to board members and city officials. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, steadying my breathing. This was it. The moment everything I'd been building toward came due. My phone buzzed. A text from Marin. "I'm inside. Front row. See you in there." I grabbed my materials and walked toward the building. The conference room was larger than I'd expected, set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members would sit. The room was already filling with people: neighbors, environmental activists, property developers, journalists from the local paper. And there, in the third row, sat Aaron and Liana. Aaron looked pale, his suit slightly too big, like he'd lost weight. Liana sat rigid beside him, her expression carved from ice. When she saw me, something flickered in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or fear, dressed up as defiance. I didn't acknowledge them, just walked to the front row where Marin had saved me a seat. "Big crowd," she said quietly. "Word got around," I said. "Holt's lawyer is here," she said, nodding toward a woman in an expensive suit sitting near the board table. "She's good, corporate environmental defense, but we're better prepared." Jonah arrived a few minutes later, carrying his own folder of materials. He gave me a quick nod and took a seat 2 rows back. At exactly 9 o'clock, the board members filed in. 5 of them, representing different municipal interests. Patricia, who'd run the previous meeting, sat in the center chair. She looked tired, like she already regretted agreeing to chair this hearing. "Good morning," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "We're here for a mandatory environmental compliance hearing regarding the Riverbend development proposal submitted by Holt Avery Development Group. This hearing will address concerns raised by Mr. Nathaniel Rowan regarding conservation easements and potential regulatory violations." She went through the procedural formalities: rules of conduct, time limits for presentations, order of speakers. Then she looked directly at Holt. "Mr. Avery, you'll have 30 minutes to present your position and respond to the concerns raised." Holt stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He moved to the presentation area with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. "Thank you, Madam Chair," he said. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these concerns, which I believe stem from a simple misunderstanding of the project scope and timeline." He launched into his presentation, smooth, professional, full of charts and economic projections. He talked about job creation, tax revenue, community benefits. He showed architectural renderings that made the project look like a nature sanctuary rather than a commercial development. Then he addressed the environmental concerns. "We've been in full compliance with all environmental regulations," he said. "The access agreement we secured from the Rowan family was vetted by our legal team and found to be properly authorized. Mr. Nathaniel Rowan's concerns, while understandable, are based on an outdated easement that doesn't actually apply to this specific project scope." He clicked to another slide showing a property map. "As you can see, the construction zone falls outside the protected buffer areas. We've maintained appropriate setbacks and followed all wetland protection protocols." It was convincing. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd think everything was legitimate. But I knew what to look for. Holt finished his presentation and returned to his seat. His lawyer whispered something to him, and he nodded. Patricia looked at me. "Mr. Rowan, you have 30 minutes to present your concerns." I stood, picked up my binder, and walked to the presentation area. The room was completely silent. I opened the binder and pulled out the first document. "Madam Chair, board members," I said, my voice steady. "What I'm about to present is an opinion. It's documentation of systematic violations of environmental regulations, property rights, and conservation agreements that were established 12 years ago specifically to prevent exactly what Mr. Avery is attempting to do. I placed the first document under the document camera so it projected on the screen behind me. This is the conservation easement I filed in 2013, covering multiple parcels adjacent to the Riverbend Wetland Conservation Zone. It's legally binding and grants me environmental oversight authority for any development that could impact the wetland buffer zones. I clicked to the next document. This is the access agreement signed by Aaron and Leanna Rowan 3 weeks ago. Note that my signature, required by the easement, is not present, which means this agreement is invalid. I could feel the energy in the room shift. But that's just the beginning, I said. I spent the next 20 minutes systematically dismantling Holt's claims. I showed maps proving the construction zone did encroach on buffer areas. I presented photos documenting unauthorized vehicle access and vegetation clearing that had occurred before any approvals. I provided Jonah's observational notes showing water quality degradation over the past 6 months. Every claim backed up with documentation, every assertion supported by evidence, every timeline verified with dates and GPS coordinates. The board members leaned forward, taking notes. Patricia's expression grew increasingly serious. I saved the most damaging evidence for last. These photos were taken 8 days ago, I said, displaying the images of fresh tire tracks and disturbed soil. They show active construction preparation on protected land before this hearing even took place. Before any approvals were granted, Mr. Avery has been moving forward as if approval was guaranteed, showing complete disregard for the regulatory process. I heard someone gasp behind me. In summary, I said, this project violates conservation easements, exceeds permitted boundaries, damages protected habitat, and demonstrates a pattern of regulatory non-compliance. I'm requesting that the board immediately suspend all activities related to this project and require comprehensive environmental remediation before any further consideration. I closed the binder and returned to my seat. The room was buzzing with whispered conversations. Patricia called for a brief recess so the board could review the materials. As people stood and stretched, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned. Aaron stood there, his face pale. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" "What I should have done from the beginning," I said. "But we'll lose everything. The house, our savings, everything." "You should have thought about that before you signed something you didn't understand." Liana appeared beside him, her expression furious. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Finally getting back at us for not worshiping you like you think we should?" "This has nothing to do with worship," I said calmly. "It has to do with respect and consequences." "You self-righteous," she started. "Careful," Marin said, standing beside me. "We're in a legal proceeding. I'd hate to have to add harassment to the record." Liana's mouth snapped shut. She grabbed Aaron's arm and pulled him away. The recess ended. The board members returned, their expressions grave. Patricia cleared her throat. "After reviewing the evidence presented by Mr. Rowan, the board has serious concerns about the Riverbend project." Holt's lawyer stood. "Madam Chair, we request time to respond to these allegations." "You'll have that opportunity," Patricia said. "But first, given the documentation of unauthorized activity on protected land, we're issuing an immediate cease and desist order. All work related to this project must stop immediately pending further investigation." Holt's face went red. "This is..." "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "we're referring this matter to the State Environmental Enforcement Division for potential civil penalties. The evidence suggests willful violations of wetland protection regulations." She looked at Aaron and Liana. "As for the property owners who signed the Invalid Access Agreement, you'll be receiving notice of potential fines for allowing unauthorized access to protected buffer zones." Aaron's head dropped into his hands. "This hearing is adjourned," Patricia said. "The board will reconvene in 30 days to determine next steps after the state investigation is complete." The gavel came down. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room erupted in conversation. Journalists rushed forward with questions. Board members gathered their papers. Holt stood arguing with his lawyer. I gathered my materials and walked toward the exit. Marin caught up with me. "That was perfect. You couldn't have done it better." "Thanks for your help," I said. "What will you do now?" "Go back to work," I said. "Same as always." I walked out of the building into the cold morning air. Behind me, I could hear raised voices, arguments, the chaos of everything unraveling, but I didn't look back. I got in my truck, set the binder on the passenger seat, and drove away. The days after the hearing passed in a strange blur of silence and noise. My phone rang constantly. Calls from Aaron that I didn't answer, blocked numbers that were probably Liana, a few reporters asking for comments I declined to give. Work continued as normal. I filed reports, conducted surveys, reviewed data with Jonah. But the town buzzed with talk. I could feel it whenever I went into the cafe or the hardware store. People looked at me differently now, some with respect, some with something that looked like fear, a few with poorly concealed hostility. I didn't care. On the third day after the hearing, Mrs. Callahan stopped me in the grocery store parking lot. "Mr. Rowan," she said, slightly out of breath from hurrying to catch me. "I just wanted to say, what you did was brave. My husband and I always thought there was something wrong with that development project, but nobody wanted to make waves." "Sometimes waves need to be made," I said. She nodded. "I also wanted to say, I'm sorry about Aaron and Liana. I know this must be difficult." "It is what it is," I said. She patted my arm and walked away. That afternoon, I received an email from the State Environmental Enforcement Division. They'd completed a preliminary assessment of the Riverbend site and confirmed multiple violations. Formal charges were being filed against Holt Avery Development Group. Civil penalties would likely exceed $200,000. The email also mentioned that property owners who'd facilitated access would face fines ranging from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the extent of their involvement. I forwarded the email to Marin without comment. She called me 5 minutes later. "Did you see the penalty amounts?" "I saw them," I said. "This is going to bankrupt Holt's operation in this county. He's already facing lawsuits from other projects. This could be the final straw." "Good," I said. "And your son—" "We'll learn an expensive lesson," I said. "Maybe that's what he needs." She was quiet for a moment. "You okay, Nate?" "I'm fine," I said. "Better than I've been in years, actually. And it was true, despite everything, despite the estrangement from Aaron, despite the hostility from Liana, despite the gossip and the stares. I felt lighter, clearer, like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I'd been shouldering for too long. That evening, I drove out to the wetlands. The observation deck was empty, the air cool and still. I stood at the railing and looked out over the marsh. The water was clearer than it had been in months. The tire tracks were slowly being reclaimed by vegetation. In another season, you'd barely be able to tell anything had been disturbed. Nature healed itself if you gave it the chance. I heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind me, turned to see Jonah approaching. "Thought I might find you here," he said, coming to stand beside me. "Good instinct," I said. "I heard about the Enforcement Division's findings. They're recommending restoration work be funded entirely by Holt." "That's appropriate," I said. We stood in silence for a while, watching the evening light paint the water gold. "People at work are talking," Jonah said. "Some of them think you were too hard on your son." "Let them think what they want," I said. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you did the right thing, standing up for something that matters, not letting people run over you just because it's easier to stay quiet." "Thanks," I said. "Is there any chance, do you think you and Aaron will ever—" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe, maybe not. Right now, he needs to figure out who he is when Liana's not telling him what to think. And I need to remember that I deserve respect regardless of whether I get it from him." Jonah nodded. "Well, if you need anything—" "I know where to find you," I said. He left, and I stayed until the sun set completely. Then I drove home, made dinner, and sat in my quiet house with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "You're a vindictive old man who destroyed his own son's life because your ego couldn't handle being treated like the irrelevant fossil you are. I hope you're happy. I hope your precious swamp is worth losing your family over. You'll end up alone, and you'll deserve every minute of it." It wasn't signed, but I recognized Liana's handwriting from the few birthday cards she'd bothered to send over the years. I read it once, then crumpled it and threw it away. That afternoon, I received a formal letter from Marin. The board had scheduled a follow-up hearing for 6 weeks out to determine the final disposition of the Riverbend project. It was likely to be rejected entirely. Holt was already in negotiations with the state to reduce penalties in exchange for funding complete habitat restoration. The letter also mentioned that Aaron and Liana had hired a lawyer to contest their fines. Marin didn't think they had much of a case, but they were trying. I filed the letter with the rest of my documentation and went back to work. Work was steady, calming. I had surveys to complete, reports to file, data to analyze. The rhythms of it grounded me in a way nothing else did. Out in the field, things made sense. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. No lies. No manipulation. Just observation and documentation. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Rowan? A woman's voice, professional and slightly nervous. This is Jennifer from the Regional Conservation Alliance. I'm calling to see if you'd be willing to speak at our annual conference about the Riverbend case. Speak? I said. Yes. We think your documentation and approach could be a model for other communities facing similar development pressures. How you used existing conservation tools to protect critical habitat, it's exactly the kind of success story we need to share. I thought about it for a moment. I'll consider it. Thank you. I'll send you the details. We'd be honored to have you. After she hung up, I sat for a while thinking about the word success. Was this success? I'd saved the wetlands. I'd stopped an illegal development. I'd held people accountable for violations. But I'd also lost my son. At least for now. Maybe forever. Was it worth it? I looked out the window at the trees in my backyard, at the bird feeder I'd hung years ago, at the natural world that had always made more sense to me than people. Yes, I thought. It was worth it. Because some things mattered more than comfort, more than peace bought with silence, more than relationships that required me to be smaller, quieter, less than what I was. Dignity mattered. Truth mattered. Standing up when it would be easier to sit down, that mattered. 3 weeks after the hearing, I was working at my desk when Patricia from the Environmental Board called. Mr. Rowan, she said, I wanted to give you an advance notice. The state investigation is complete. Their findings will be published tomorrow, but I thought you should know. It's even worse than we thought. How so? I asked. Holt's been running similar schemes in 3 other counties. False easements, forged signatures, unauthorized clearing. Your documentation triggered investigations in multiple jurisdictions. He's facing criminal charges now, not just civil penalties. I sat back in my chair. Criminal? Fraud, forgery, environmental crimes. He could face prison time. The State Attorney General's office is building a case. What about Aaron and Liana? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Their lawyer made a deal. They're cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced fines. They'll pay $2,000 each and complete community service focused on environmental restoration. They claim they were misled by Holt, which appears to be true based on the evidence. I see, I said. Mr. Rowan, Nathaniel, I want to apologize. We should have caught this earlier. If we'd been more diligent with permit reviews, none of this would have escalated the way it did. You caught it now, I said. That's what matters. After she hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Aaron was cooperating. That was good. It meant he was finally taking responsibility, even if it was forced. But it also meant this was really over. The bridge between us had been burned thoroughly. There'd be no easy path back. That evening, Jonah stopped by my house with a 6-pack of beer and a pizza. Figured you might want company, he said when I opened the door. Come in, I said. We ate on the back porch, watching the sunset. Jonah told me about a new survey project coming up, about changes at the office, about normal things that had nothing to do with hearings or families or consequences. It was exactly what I needed. Can I ask you something? Jonah said eventually. Sure. Do you regret it? Any of it? I thought about the question seriously. No, I said. I don't. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Aaron made the choices he made, but do I regret standing up for what was right? No, never. That takes courage, Jonah said. Or stubbornness, I said. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. We finished the beer as stars began to appear. Jonah left around 9, and I cleaned up and went inside. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. Dad, this is Aaron. New number. Liana and I are separating. She moved out yesterday. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I thought you should know. I also thought you should know that I'm sorry. For all of it. For not standing up for you. For the smile. For choosing wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and stood at the kitchen sink, looking out at the dark backyard. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to say something comforting, to rebuild the bridge, to make everything okay. But another part, the part that had learned a hard lesson about respect and boundaries, knew that sorry was just a word. That real change took time. That trust, once broken, didn't heal overnight. I picked up the phone and typed a response. I appreciate you telling me. Take care of yourself. I hit send before I could second guess it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a door left slightly open. Whether Aaron walked through it or not was up to him. The next morning, the state's findings were published in the local paper. Front page. Major environmental fraud case rocks development community. The article detailed Holt's schemes across multiple counties, the forged documents, the systematic violations. My name appeared several times as the environmental specialist whose meticulous documentation broke the case open. My phone rang all day. News outlets wanting interviews, environmental groups wanting statements, the Regional Conservation Alliance calling again about that conference speech. I agreed to the speech, declined the interviews. That weekend, I drove out to the wetlands. The observation deck had a new sign, Riverbend Conservation Zone, Protected Wetland Habitat. Below it, in smaller letters, preservation made possible through citizen advocacy and environmental oversight. I stood at the railing for a long time, watching herons fish in the shallows. The water was clear, the vegetation healthy. The tire tracks from Holt's unauthorized access were almost completely gone, reclaimed by new growth. It looked exactly as it should, wild, protected, allowed to be what it was meant to be. Behind me, I heard voices. A family with young kids had come up to the deck. The father pointed at the herons, explaining to his children how they hunted. The kids pressed against the railing, excited and curious, just like Aaron used to be. I smiled slightly and walked back to my truck. The following week, Marin called with final news. Holt had pleaded guilty to avoid trial. 5 years in prison, restitution of nearly $2 million, permanent ban from development work in the state. It's over, she said. You won, Nate. Completely. It's not about winning, I said. I know, she said. But still, you should be proud. After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about pride, about victory, about what success actually looked like when you stripped away all the noise. I'd saved the wetlands. I'd held people accountable. I'd stood up for something that mattered, but I'd also lost my son. For now, at least, maybe forever. Was it worth it? The question still hung there, unanswered and maybe unanswerable. That night, I got another text from Aaron. I started community service today, working on trail restoration at the state park. It's good work, physical, honest, makes me think about things differently. I know we're not okay. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm trying. I read it twice, then replied, Good, keep trying. It wasn't much, but it was something. The environmental compliance hearing reconvened on a cold morning 6 weeks after everything had started. The room was less crowded this time. No journalists, no curious neighbors, just the board members, Marin, Jonah, and a handful of environmental officials. Holt was notably absent, already in custody awaiting sentencing. Patricia called the meeting to order. We're here to make a final determination on the Riverbend development proposal. Given the findings of criminal activity and systematic violations, I think we all know where this is headed. She went through the formalities quickly. The board voted unanimously to reject the project permanently. The land would remain protected wetland habitat. All access agreements were nullified. Restoration work, funded by Holt's restitution payments, would begin immediately. Is there anything else to address? Patricia asked. I raised my hand. Just one thing. She nodded. Mr. Rowan. But I wasn't done yet. I stood, pulling out additional folders I'd kept separate. Before we close this matter, I have supplementary documentation. Evidence of 3 more Holt properties operating under false pretenses across 2 counties, each one with forged easements, each one causing active environmental harm right now. The room went silent. I placed the thick folders on the board table. I've spent the past 6 weeks investigating further. These files contain financial records showing systematic bribery of local inspectors, communications proving deliberate circumvention of regulations, testimony from contractors who were instructed to begin work before permits were secured. Patricia's face went pale. Mr. Rowan, these are serious allegations. With complete documentation, I interrupted, every claim verified, every date confirmed, every violation recorded with photographic evidence and GPS coordinates. The state environmental prosecutor stood quickly. Mr. Rowan, we need to review this immediately. It's yours, I said, sliding the folders across, along with digital copies already submitted to the federal EPA this morning. Holt's lawyer shot to her feet. This is beyond the scope of this hearing. This is harassment. This is evidence of ongoing environmental crimes, I said calmly. Crimes that were enabled by a system that assumed quiet people would stay quiet. I looked directly at where Holt would have sat if he weren't already in custody. I didn't stay quiet, and I brought receipts for everything. The prosecutor flipped through the folders rapidly, her expression growing darker with each page. If this documentation is accurate, and preliminary review suggests it is, we're looking at additional federal charges, environmental crimes across multiple jurisdictions. This expands the case significantly. I turned to face the full room. Aaron and Liana sat in the back row, their faces ashen. I also have documentation showing that the Rowans knowingly provided false information to board officials about property access rights. Not just ignorance, active misrepresentation in 3 separate filings. Aaron stood abruptly. "Dad, please." "Sit down," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. He sat. I pulled out another folder. This contains their text messages with Holt coordinating the deception, emails discussing how to handle my concerns, a recorded phone conversation where Liana explicitly states they need to shut the old man up before he ruins everything. Liana's face went from pale to crimson. "You recorded us?" "No," I said. "Holt did, for insurance. I just found his insurance policy during discovery. I set the final folder on the table. Based on this evidence, I'm formally requesting the board impose maximum fines on both Aaron and Liana Rowan for knowing participation in environmental fraud. Additionally, I'm requesting they be permanently barred from any future development activities in this county." Patricia looked like she might be sick. "Mr. Rowan, these are family members. These are individuals who violated environmental law," I said, "who pushed me aside, literally, when I tried to raise concerns, who mocked my work and my life while using my property for illegal purposes. Family doesn't exempt anyone from consequences." The prosecutor was making urgent calls. State officials huddled in frantic conversation. Marin leaned over and whispered, "Nate, are you sure about this?" "Completely," I said. Aaron tried again. "Dad, I know we made mistakes, but this will destroy us." I turned to face him fully. "You smiled while your wife pushed me. You asked me for space when I asked for respect. You signed away land you had no right to sign away, and when I raised concerns, you told me I was making things difficult." I stepped closer to where he sat. "I spent 30 years being the man everyone could safely ignore, being accommodating, being small, letting people push me because I thought that's what family required." My voice was steady, cold, final. "I'm done being that man, and you're done benefiting from my silence." The prosecutor closed her phone. "Mr. Rowan, based on this preliminary review, will be filing expanded charges. The evidence you've provided appears to substantiate claims of conspiracy to commit environmental fraud." She looked at Aaron and Liana. "You should retain legal counsel immediately." Liana started crying. Aaron's head dropped into his hands. I felt nothing. Patricia's gavel came down shakily. "This hearing is adjourned. All parties will receive formal notice of next steps within 48 hours. People started moving, talking urgently, filing out. I gathered my materials methodically. Marin stood beside me, her expression unreadable. "You just burned it all down," she said quietly. "I did," I agreed. "No going back from this." "I know." Jonah approached, his eyes wide. "Nate, I've never seen anything like that." "Justice," I said simply. "That's what it was." Aaron blocked my path to the exit. His face was streaked with tears. "How can you do this? I'm your son." "And I was your father," I said. "But you forgot that when it mattered." "I made mistakes." "You made choices," I corrected. "And choices have consequences. You wanted me to learn my place. Consider this lesson complete." I stepped around him and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Liana's voice, shrill with panic. "This is your fault. You pushed him too far." I didn't turn around, didn't stop, didn't look back. Outside, the morning air was sharp and clean. The parking lot was emptying, people rushing to make calls, to process what had just happened. I walked to my truck, loaded my binder carefully, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. My phone buzzed, messages flooding in. The Regional Conservation Alliance, state officials, news outlets. I turned the phone off. Then I drove to the wetlands. The observation deck was empty, the marsh quiet except for the sound of water moving through reeds. I stood at the railing and looked out over the protected habitat. The water ran clear. The herons fished in the shallows. The willows grew strong and undisturbed. This place would outlast all of us. The corruption, the family drama, the betrayals and consequences. It would remain exactly what it was meant to be: wild, protected, free. I pulled out my phone and turned it back on. One final message to send, to the prosecutor. Additional documentation available upon request. 3 more properties under investigation. I'll provide full cooperation. Then I forwarded everything to the federal task force. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the marsh in shades of gold and amber. A heron called in the distance. I smiled and walked back to my truck, leaving the chaos and the family and the old life behind. The wetlands were safe. The guilty would face justice, and I was finally, completely, absolutely free.